Hello and welcome to the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. We are just the two of us again, Meike and Alex, watching Babylon 5 for the first and for the upteenth time. Layla unfortunately can't join us today because she is stuck in Hamburg with family matters, but if everything goes smoothly, she will join us for next week's episode as usual. Today we are talking about the Spider in the Web episode of the second season, which has a lot of stuff in it. But before we go into the synopsis and our first impressions, as usual, we will do a little bit of an introductory question, and this week inspired by Sheridan's own little obsession with collecting conspiracies and Garibaldi collecting paranoias, we are asking ourselves, is there something that we actually collect? Is there some strange little thing that we have a lot of? And Mike, maybe you want to start for this.
Yeah, well, the strange little thing it isn't. When I was a kid, or over time, I went through different stages of collecting things. When I was I started school, there was this obsession with my classmates collecting stickers. So you had this like, oh my gosh, it's sparkly, it has special textures or stuff like that. Then sometime later it changed to Pokemon cards, and yeah, well, since none of them really had a bigger reason for me, I stopped at collecting them at some point. And well, the only thing I would still consider myself collecting are books, because yeah, usually I can't go in a bookstore without at least one book buying. So yeah, it's the closest I come to collecting things, and I'm really interested in special bound books. If it's a leather bound book, it has some special printing on it or stuff like that, I really like them. Though since it's really expensive most of the time, I don't have much of them.
This is very unfortunate because I'm almost going to give the exact same thing. There are a lot of things I've collected from an older family member. I even have postmark collections downstairs. But personally, what I collect, or I'm the closest to collecting, are coffee table books. So big, beautiful, like with big illustrations, art books of various sorts, and just odd books that I can find, like the big white book back there is the Codex Seraphinianus, which is this conceptual artwork book with a fictional language inside of it and a lot of cryptic illustrations that are just very inspiring. And for all kinds of creative things that you do, I find these are just always these big centerpieces. Problem is just I don't have that many coffee tables, so they're mostly stuck in big shelves. So it's a similar problem to you.
But yeah, well, for the listeners, or more the watchers, you usually see behind me this somewhat large bookcase, which I have a second one filled with books, and that's more or less it, since I have limited space and regularly go through my books and sort them out. But you might have a better idea of how big Alex's collection is in the background, because that's just a small percentage of it. So yeah, I'm really envious of your collection.
I should say a lot of this is inherited, though. I come from a family that has done a lot of book collecting, and they're just so many more that are just accumulating themselves, which I think for both of us means if we ever get a chance to get Jakar's book from this show, this like big leather-bound one, would be great to get our hands on that. That might be an arts and crafts project eventually for the future.
There are a lot of books from series and movies I would love to have.
That would be great. But I mean, let's dive right into this show, and I will attempt a little bit of an episode synopsis, a spider in a web, like I said. And once again, we get visitors on the station. That's how most stories start on Babylon 5. This time around, it's a negotiator, a representative of Future Corp, who is here to negotiate some kind of deal that he says will help with Martian independence, a topic that has come up before in season 1 and now seems to be coming to a head. But these negotiations are unfortunately cut short when he is murdered by another mysterious visitor to the station who seems to have been a kind of extremist freedom fighter from Mars turned into a weapon by covert forces working behind the scenes. And this is what both Garibaldi and Sheridan are slowly unraveling throughout this show. Is this a fair summary?
Yeah, I think it covers the most important things.
In that case, this is kind of a momentous episode, right? We do get an introduction to 1 or 2 new threats and a little bit more insight into our captain as well. So what are your first impressions after seeing this show?
Overall, I like this episode. Sometimes I had this feeling of this is far too quick paced. I think I'm still stuck in the first season where it's a bit too slow for my taste, and this episode felt a bit too quick. But I think it's just an adjustment problem I have from season 1 transferring to season 2. I really am happy to see Talia back. I mean, we missed her for quite a long time. And yeah, I'm not really sure how to wrap my mind around this episode because there's so much happening. It's hard to make a quick, short impression on this. I think it's easier to just go through it and dig up everything that there is.
I think that's completely right, because in my own experience, whenever I think about this episode, I think about the cyber zombie and the fact that this is a thing and kind of a cool concept, and everything that happens around that surprises me when I rewatch this episode every time. Every time I'm like, oh, this is where we learn about Bureau 13, and this is where we learn about Sheridan's obsession with collecting things, but that never sticks in my mind specifically on this episode because there's just so much happening. And yeah, when I'm asked to just give a quick rundown of what happens, what kind of episode is this, all I can think about is, oh yeah, this is when Talia comes back and we get some kind of fucked up telepath stuff happening. So yeah, let's...
And I mean, this quick and full packed episode, we really have this, in the beginning already, when there is a lot to do for now I'm stuck to Susan for Ivanova.
Yeah.
And where I mean, it was really cute to see Sharon standing there. It's so good to be captain.
That was fantastic.
Everyone is bustling and busy around him, but I think it kind of gives the perfect overall impression of what is going to happen in the rest of the episode. It's like that, short, quick, fast paced. So I think this is a good way to start this episode because it's so fitting.
And I think this kind of reflects also the entire experience that Sheridan himself has. I think he has some really cool scenes in this episode that we can talk about probably. But he is new to the station and he kind of has to hit the ground running. And so for the first part of season 2, it's this recurring theme that he needs to find his footing and that he is kind of overwhelmed by so many things happening at the same time, which in retrospect makes me just appreciate how good Sinclair was at his job. And I do think it's true that he as a character and also how he was acted was just this center of calm in this persistent storm that was always around there. He was a captain who had already adjusted to this entire station an entire year long before we met him in the first season. And I think we kind of see here that Sheridan isn't in that place, so everything is a little bit more hectic as long as we follow him. But yeah, he is so proud of himself when he's like, I promoted Susan and it worked and now I can delegate things and it doesn't explode. Isn't that great? I have everything under control in before everything goes haywire as usual.
Of course, because it wouldn't be B5.
This writing whiplash that you're talking about, though, with season 1 and 2 feeling very different, is something that I think we can talk about in our little post box in the end as well, because we received a comment somewhat to that effect that I think is a pretty good opportunity to talk about the writing of this show a little bit. But yeah, we start, and there is this little hint at something that is happening, this like alien negotiation with a species that is like trying to get on board Babylon 5 and stuff that we don't really get to see anything about, but it starts this episode immediately with this feeling that things are happening on the station, but also outside of the station. And this is something that I immediately noted down as something that I would love to talk about, is the sense that the main conceit of this plot, everything that is happening with Mars, is something that has been brewing outside of Babylon 5 for a very long time. We heard in the news, literally on the station, that there was a rebellion, there was fighting going on, Mars wants independence, but it's never really reached the station. And I love that, because in so many science fiction settings, or settings in general, whatever character we follow, whatever ship we follow, wherever this show takes place, is usually the linchpin of the universe. Everything important has to happen there. And here in Babylon 5, there's immediately a sense, no, there's places where, like on Mars, entire stories unfold that Babylon 5 has very little to do with. And we get kind of thrown in the middle here, and I really like that.
Yeah, it's again a realistic thing. I mean, you can live in a capital city, and still the important things don't necessarily have anything to do with the place around, or with the people living there, or working from there. So what I have to point out, that I was really happy, or no, maybe that's the wrong connotation, but it was interesting. Let's go with this. It was interesting to see the first time a glance on Earth.
Yes.
The San Diego wastelands.
Which
I'm
sorry. I'm just so excited because I believe we heard about the San Diego wasteland once before. I think there was either a news article or at some point somebody talked about like various surprise attacks that happened in history, and mentioned that there was a nuclear attack on San Diego at some point, which is just a fun reference because the writer of the show, JMS, got stabbed in San Diego at some point, and he was so mad about it that he decided, you know what, in my setting, this city is not going to exist anymore, which is a nice tidbit. But yeah, you're completely right. We get to see part of Earth, and it's kind of not in a great shape.
Yeah, well, for me, this was seeing it like yeah, great. A really big chunk of place on Earth destroyed, obviously to an extent that living there is not an option, not even for vegetation and animals. And yeah, but no matter what, let's go out in space and continue our rampage. I love it.
Yeah, it's setting priorities straight. And it is kind of a contrast. We once again in this episode also see interaction with senators, and they are usually like in big cities like Geneva, where it's kind of idyllic in the background with green trees and little houses and everything. But we see like, no, the actual place is kind of in a worse state. Although I'm sure not everything in like the wasteland is still an exception, of course. I'm sure most of Earth is fine, but it's still a very poignant place to start our journey on, definitely.
Yeah, well, and this rather ominous continuation with this, yeah, where you have this control panel blinking and the news blaring in the background, and then a message coming in, control is prepared to go online. Yeah, that was I'm not sure how to feel about it. I think it was okay, not really convincing, but yeah, like I stamped it down as 90s thing maybe, but I wouldn't be surprised seeing this in a actual series or movie.
It carries for me a lot this like early X-Files feeling of, this is this secret government agency that is doing things. It's very overtly laden with symbolism. Like, it feels to me like something where the show is saying, this is the part where you should stop and take screenshots because this is where we hide all the hints in plain sight and stuff like that, which is very cheesy, but on this at the same time, for me, it very much establishes clearly, okay, this is the big bad that we are dealing with now for this episode, the secret society that smuggled something on board. And I think in this like first shot also, when the hand comes out of the box after control is activated, it almost feels like, oh, is this gonna be a monster episode of sorts? And I have to say, I'm every time very relieved when we actually meet Abel and he is much more of an actual person that people interact with and that has a much more interesting story than what it first seems. But yeah, the beginning here is a little bit flat when it comes to that. Although I have to...
Especially this, before you go on, especially this scene where I thought, oh, yeah, Frankenstein, came finally to B5. But what irritated me was the shot on the hand was so long, and especially this ring. I mean, it is a nice accessory, but it felt like the focus of the camera was like, okay, is this important, this ring? And yeah, it was holding this short scene was still so long that it almost became comically, because it didn't really have anything to say then, hey, we have someone here on B5 that just broke out of some sort of cold sleep.
It does almost feel like a shot that I would expect if we are dealing with vampires or such, right? And it's this big creature reveal and there's something odd about this hand, so I just keep staring at it.
Or zombies.
Exactly, but it's not a creature design, it's just a guy with a hand, and it's not until much later on that we see the implantations and stuff that make it into this more freakish Frankenstein monster. But while all of this is happening, there's of course also the official visit on Babylon 5, and this is, I noted his name down, Mr. Isogi, who comes as a representative of Future Corp, and I'm a little bit curious what your first reaction, or maybe just your thoughts are on this entire plot before everything goes wrong, because personally I have to say I found it quite refreshing. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts on that, because usually if I have a story about an independence movement, a planet wants to become independent and stuff, I expect political leaders to be here, or maybe a freedom fighter, maybe a rebellion of sorts. I don't usually think about, this is where a private business representative is going to show up. And usually if I watch a science fiction show, if I think about corporations, it's more in the vein of what we've seen in Babylon 5 so far. Some kind of clandestine evil corporation coming in with some secret plan to make a lot of money. But here we get Mr. Sogi, who seems to be just a very stand-up guy who has a good business opportunity and plays a crucial role that might give Mars its independence. And I kind of like that, because it puts a light on this element of nations trying to emancipate themselves, which usually is pretty overlooked, which is getting economically independent and building a strong private sector that is able to sustain them so they aren't dependent on whatever colony or colonizers they had before.
Yeah, well, I really like the portrayal of this person. I think this is really a nice difference to the usual take, because it feels from his appearance, he doesn't look like the usual business guy, and more like a down-to-earth, normal person. And I think this is an important thing to show this kind of way how some things can start progress in a positive and more peaceful way. I'm not sure how good this reference is, but I once watched sort of documentary which was called Tomorrowland. No, I think it's Tomorrow, not Tomorrowland. We will look this up and put it here. which is a really interesting take on how the world can progress in a positive way. The initial idea was a study from several years ago that there will be if the world stays the way it is, that there's not enough food, not enough water, problems with economic things, with the whole school systems, and this group of people who made this movie were traveling around the world looking for solutions for different problems, and one was Detroit, where at least at that point was really problematic, not enough jobs, really rough, declining possibilities to live in the city. And what they were showing were several ways where the usual normal people started in doing community gardens to give them a ground to live for, or to live on, and it kind of feels familiar that one person, or in this case, a group of people who maybe on an idea formed this corporation and are just trying to make the world a little better, and I think also kind of shows with his death how easily things can be determined. I mean, death is usually not necessarily the reason these things don't work out, but I like the overall setting because it's just so normal, and at least to me there's this little message of anyone can do something. It's just hard work and maybe a lot of failures you have to put behind you.
I think that's a pretty good reference right there, especially because it highlights how Mr. Isogi represents a little bit of this in-between state where you do want kind of a grassroots movement, to use this term that's very popular. You do want people coming together and, the community doing something, but at the same time, for something as big as reforming a city or as big as creating an independent Mars, you need to at some point organize yourself. You need to at some point become something bigger than just a community protesting movement, because if it's just that, it has this danger of just becoming very militant and becoming very destructive, like we see in Babylon 5 here as well. So that we here have somebody who is still connected to the people on the ground, connected to Amanda Carter, who is somebody on the ground, but at the same time also has managed to accumulate resources and such that are going to be necessary, and now goes this way of saying, okay, I will negotiate on the big table with the big leagues and try to get approval from the committee, from the government and stuff, because otherwise it's just not going to work out. You need to have at some point this larger framework to make this work. And to showcase that, this jump is difficult, but it can be made, but it can also be easily undone, is I think a pretty good perspective. It's one of the more hopeful moments in Babylon 5 so far.
By the way, I'm not getting money for this, but I think for those who might need a little uplift, motivation, if the world is a bit dark, the movie I just mentioned is, at least from my point of view, a really good thing. So I might want to look at that.
We might even drop a link of that in a comment or something like that, so we can direct people more easily to it, or to places where they can find where to watch it. Okay, so we have this setup, and of course you already alluded to it. Death comes in between some of these plans very rapidly, and he is killed by the Free Mars movement, and it's immediately acknowledged that that is a real thing. That is an organization that exists, that is considered extreme. We can assume it probably has some connection to the battles that broke out a little while ago on Mars. So it creates this interesting situation where the conflict between Mars and Earth immediately becomes a lot more gray, because we see there are very real reasons why a colony like Mars wants to be independent, but there's also immediately proponents of this who resort to terrorism, for lack of a better word, to a degree that is no longer acceptable. Now it becomes a very big pickle, because how do you resolve this conflict? And this isn't necessarily even something that this episode is interested in doing. It just opens up this opportunity of saying everybody involved in this conflict has these extremist elements that just make it so difficult for any productive solution to come about.
Yeah, though I think this whole idea of that this is done by the Free Mars movement. In one way, it's instigated through this senator who is called Sheridan, which I really liked his answers of, hey, this is not my job and you can't make me do this. But yeah, she is like, yeah, there are two people, and one is from Mars, one is from this Future Corp, and there is surely something happening that we don't like. So go and have a look. And I mean, the moment, I'm not sure what the name of the woman from the Mars was.
Amanda Carter.
Amanda, okay. When Sheridan talks with her, I think it immediately, her reaction is so genuine that it's immediately like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. It can't be the Free Mars folks who are pulling this. So it's just a lot of people pointing their fingers at each other and saying those were the other bad guys. It's kind of like this Spider-Man meme.
It is. I'm glad that you mentioned the senator again. I would have forgotten about her. But yeah, this entire interaction I absolutely love, because it also showcases Sheridan is so proud of himself in the beginning of this episode. He can delegate now, but there is still this entire political aspect to being captain of Babylon 5, where he not only has to represent Earth, but at the same time he has to defend Babylon 5's neutrality against Earth to some degree. And I really like that this episode also puts us towards this narrative of saying, well, of course Babylon 5 is supposed to be independent as a negotiation place and has this special rights, sure, but if it's a matter of national security, these special rights can be revoked very easily. And usually this is something that, at least in most media that I know, is associated with this post-9/11 world. This idea that, there was a massive attack and now you get much more aggressively searched at airports and stuff because we've decided that some personal freedoms and stuff take a step back because of the interest of national security. But here we clearly see this isn't new. This is an idea that already exists very much, and also in Earth Alliance pops up now and again, and it really relies on people like Sheridan to put a stop to this becoming too extreme.
Yeah, you usually have this drastically mixed group, the one who are shouting for more security that may be reasonable to a certain point and then goes over the top where it's just too much restriction of personal freedom. And then there are others that are saying, no, we're not doing anything, which is the opposite scale. And the sad thing is, most of the time you have these both opposites that are the loudest, and therefore get the most hurt for, obvious reasons.
Which I think ties very well into the episode again. If this episode advocates for anything, and I think it's that extremism in any direction isn't really productive, and it's really up to, in this case, Amanda Carter, to somebody who is tempted in every possible way to fall back into their more extremist background as being a part of the Free Mars movement, to instead decide to do the much harder thing and continue on Mr. Asogi's legacy of just trying to do the right thing, trying to be moderate again and again and again, even though it feels like it's a much slower road. It feels like it's so easy to make all of this progress go away with some extremist actions again. And I think this is something that we see in Babylon 5 more often than not, that it tries to advocate for this middle road. Talking about Amanda Carter, I think I have to throw this little tidbit in here just because otherwise we will get comments on that. But Amanda Carter is, of course, a reference to John Carter from Mars, who is her grandfather in this story. So another cheeky little sci-fi literature reference thrown in here. Okay, should we start talking a little bit about the Lazarus Project and everything that is connected to that, and then we can circle back to the investigation around it? I think then we can structure things kind of naturally here. So what we do learn is, of course, in this assassination, the guy who visits the station, Abel, is not a normal human. He has some kind of electrifying power on it, and eventually we learn that he also has this recurring thought pattern, reliving the moment of his death again and again, and all of this slowly but surely comes together in this concept that he is essentially a kind of telepathic cyber zombie, a reconstructed person who was supposed to be dead but has been implanted with all these machineries and telepathically imprinted to become this ultimate sleeper agent for whatever Bureau 13 is. There is a lot to unwrap here. Maybe we can just start, or I can just start by saying what I really enjoy about this concept is I could imagine this guy in something like The X-Files or any other sci-fi show as a concept. But in Babylon 5, it has a little bit of a special meaning because every single tidbit about him is based on technologies or MacGuffins that we already know. We already know that scanning people's personalities is a thing. We know that deleting people's personalities is a thing. We know that implantations are a thing that exists to a large degree. We even know that the weird gloves that have electric coming out of them are a thing, which is even alluded to in this episode when they start investigating this murder and talk about this might have been a slaver's glove, like it was used on Adira early in season 1. So just this idea that this guy, this entire concept of this cyber zombie is just a consequence of things that already exist in this universe. And for all intents and purposes, we could have just looked at this universe up to this point and come up with the same idea based on what we know. And I just really like how so many things click together here. And that's my rant on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I have to admit I didn't see it at that point. But yeah, you're absolutely right about it. My focus was more the overall idea of this, cyber zombie. And the term zombie is here for the important part for me. I'm not sure. I think I already talked about this in another podcast episode. The original zombie version originating from Hawaii and these islands around was kind of like bringing a person to a state of spiritual soul death and the body continuing to live, but not necessarily this I eat your brains, but the part of working for in this special case it was the black people who had to work for the white people. And this is kind of like the science fiction, the modern version of this original zombie idea. So I really like that.
I think you talked about this before when we were talking about Believers, where the idea was that, you cut the body open and the soul leaves, and now you have this soulless shell, which was the very spiritual approach to this. This is the far more practical approach. But now that you mentioned that, let's keep this lens for viewing this episode, because I think it's very fitting. It's also fitting that we see this concept of a cyber zombie in the context of a colonizer story, of Earth colonizing Mars, and of Earth creating the perfect agent that works for them and has no soul anymore, has no morality about killing people or anything like that, has no compass. And if this is sort of the lens we apply, it's maybe worth looking into how this episode treats this kind of zombie and what it says about that, because my first instinct would be that this episode kind of goes in the direction of saying you can try to create this kind of zombie, you can try to strip a person in the moment of death of their soul and everything. But no matter how much technology you pump into this, in the end, the guy still is somewhere in there, right? He still, in some capacity, fights through this up until the point where, in the end, maybe we can debate this, but for me, it always felt like he chooses also to end his own existence on his own terms. And at that point, I think it's once again a very hopeful message in this idea that this absolute horror that is part of this original zombie idea is kind of rejected here as something that an evil or machination might aspire to, but can't actually get.
Yeah, not perfectly through with it. Yeah. Also, this especially the ending is this. Well, the outer tries to control the inner part of a human. Really, we already had this with this. I don't remember the episode. We had this mechanist guy with you put him on for our gala for voting.
The knights that came and created this cyberspace in Sinclair's head, right? Where it was
no, not that one. This
the Ikaran super weapon, the guy that was stuck in a suit. Yes.
That was what I was referring to. Because in the end we had the same structure in both. They both the original person remained in some way and started fighting the system that was pushed on them.
Especially in this moment where he comes face to face, not exactly with his creator, but basically with the original cause, right? The Ikaran is confronted with the fact that Ikara, the planet he was fighting for, is destroyed. And here we have this guy confronted with Amanda Carter, who tells him, this cause, free mass, is still something I believe in, but the way you believe you're doing it and did it also in your life wasn't the way to go. And that this is what rings through. And I love that you make this connection to Infection, because Infection is this episode which is widely regarded as a fairly bad episode of Season 1, but at the same time, there is almost no episode in all of Babylon 5 that can't make some sort of connection to it. It's weirdly ever present in discussions about it. You kind of want to forget it, but you also can't stop talking about it because it comes up time and again. And I think this is very true here, because ultimately we can view this Lazarus Project as Earth Alliance's attempt to do what the Ikarans did, to build the super soldier, which is something that I always connect to very old-timey retro sci-fi. Before we had nuclear weapons and this idea of the super weapon and Death Star that destroys planets became the most popular thing. Before that, I always think of the ultimate project for an evil regime as creating the super soldier, the unkillable, foot soldier that will form an army that can't be stopped. And to some small degree, this is a little bit what we see here.
I mean, the more important part usually is the loyalty.
Yes. And
I mean, I have my knowledge of Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany before the fall is limited, but I have to think, like, what were they trying? They were trying to control a whole region and turn everyone into this perfectly version of a citizen. This is like the next level, just in the idea of the executive arm of the government here.
Which is kind of interesting if we talk about this as something that Earth is doing in this universe, right? It's this idea, at least when we look at Eastern Germany, at movie adaptations like Das Leben der Anderen or such, it's usually taken at this ultimate symptom of failure of a state. When a state is so bad that it can't provide for its citizens anymore, only then does it have to turn to something like an internal security service that has to forcibly ensure loyalty. If you had a good system, people could be loyal to you just because it's a good system. If you have to force them into it, that's already a pretty strong indicator that your system kind of sucks. And if this is what's happening in Bureau 13, if we just look at it as a rogue agency, it gives you this hint of how bad are the things that Bureau 13 has to do, that they can't find a better way of creating agents than building them from the ground up, that you can't hire somebody for that kind of job. And it gives this a whole different nefarious intention.
And to go back from this point to this whole zombie concept, I mean, those they took for this Lazarus project are the almost dead, practically the waste.
Mm-hmm.
And this perspective is equally the perspective you have with the colonization and slavery.
Absolutely. Although I'm also questioning, is this cyber zombie as we see it in this episode the final product, or is it more of an imperfect in-between stage? Because with somebody like the guy who was a prominent figure in the Free Mars movement, I can also imagine that their dream is to perfectly override his personality so that they can use him as a puppet and, put him on camera and say, oh, I have been rejuvenated and I have turned and I now believe that Mars should remain under Earth control forever. And I have the suspicion, maybe they can't perfect this quite yet because all this technology clearly isn't working perfectly right yet. So having him as an agent is the next best thing they can kind of make work, but the illusion isn't perfect enough to use him as a puppet, as a public speaker or something like that. I love this as a concept just because it gives you this hint. There is room for improvement. They could do more.
Yes, I do understand what you mean. Though I think this to execute this plan, they had to believe to a certain degree that it will work. That the construction is somewhat perfect or at least workable. And I think the important thing here is that actions just have a bigger impact than words. And if everything of this would have worked out, I think this cyber zombie version of this man would have worked better as a destruction device for this Free Mars thing than putting him on a speaker, because then remember the episode where we had this where the nuns were attacking Ragesh 3 and the nephew of Lando was broadcasted, and we were all like, okay, they probably pushed him to do this. There were probably weapons outside the camera's view, and therefore, words are just as good as there is action behind it, which is usually the problem with politics.
And I think now that you say that, this also very seamlessly leads into a further discussion that we can have in this episode, which is all about conspiracy theories, because what does a good conspiracy theory do? It links into something that is almost true, or at least feels extremely intuitive. And something like the example you mentioned, that a Centauri colony would suddenly turn around and ask the Narn for help, is intuitively completely bullshit. That just, there's no reason why you would believe that. It goes against everything we know about the Centauri. That the leader of the Mars resistance would turn around and say, I want to belong to Earth now, makes no intuitive sense. That he would somehow manage to get on Babylon 5 and assassinate somebody who wants to make a deal, intuitively that makes sense. Even if the logistics don't check out, even if you look into it, there's no possible way he could have known that and that he should have been dead before. As a mass message, this is intuitively much more palatable and lends itself very good to this kind of conspiracy that we're talking about here. And I'm moving us a little bit in this direction because maybe let's talk a little bit about the way that everybody around him reacts to this, because we have like multiple throngs of Ivanova and Sheridan, Garibaldi investigating the whole thing. We have his interactions with Amanda Carter and ultimately the whole resolution of this. Any particular point you would like to start there?
Yeah, I kind of I'm jumping to the end somewhat, because the what I found really interesting was the conversation between Garibaldi and Sheridan. Where Sheridan talks about his idea of, this guy is not dead, and here I have this idea of this Lazarus project, and I mean, this is really thin ice he is working on. He doesn't have any official things and everything. I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, we can try this. On the other hand, it's strange that he himself is doing this and not just telling someone, yeah, here I have this idea. Not sure if it works. Try to locate this and that on Babylon 5 while I try and search for other routes. Why this guy, or what could have be how this guy would have survived or anything, and it kind of feels problematic that he is leaning in so much in this idea in his position.
I mean, we live in a time where I believe conspiracy theories are a much bigger topic than they were in the 90s, but it kind of begs this question: what is a good conspiracy theorist? You know, at what point does sensible skepticism and questioning authority and looking into nefarious things that happen turn into an obsession that is no longer viable in any way? And I think I'm kind of inclined to look back at the last week's episode where we have the same or a similar example with Jakar and his faith. At what point does faith become harmful? Well, as soon as you start using your book as dogma. So when Jakar finds a soldier of darkness or a reference to this ancient power in his book, I'm once again at this question, okay, at what point does this turn sour? And for me, this would be the point where he says, it's in the books, therefore it is true. But he doesn't do that. He investigates first. He just uses it as a starting point. And then, okay, I can say it works fine. If he goes there, investigates, and then comes back with actual proof, that's okay.
Yeah.
And in a way, this is where I'm with Sheridan right now. If the commander of Babylon 5 tells me, I collect secrets about black sites and false flag operations, and by the way, this wasn't real, and the government wants to turn people into zombies, usually that's a massive red flag, and I would hope that somebody, preferably Ivanova, removes him from this position immediately. But I can go along with it to the degree that I see him act on this in a similar way. He says, this is something that we can test, and if it works out, great. If not, then we investigate further. But I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you that it is still a little disconcerting how openly he does this and how much he relies on this hearsay that he's basing this on.
I mean, to tell Garibaldi his idea, or that I have this crazy idea, well, let's just have a look at it. We don't know what else, we have nothing else to do. Okay, but yeah, it's this heavy leaning in this idea. And well, if we are on the topic of doing things the wrong way, I was like, okay, this whole situation with Talia being captured by Abel was what the cyber zombie wouldn't have happened if the security team that escorted her would have done the job properly and entered the quarters of Amanda and checked who was in there, because that's kind of blindly trust that, considering that there was a death threat hanging over Talia is a no-go for a security guy.
Yeah, security didn't have its proudest moments in this episode. Also, the entire hostage situation later on didn't feel like they were terribly well prepared for that kind of thing, and once again relied very heavily on Sheridan going in there and negotiating with the guy, which shouldn't be necessary or shouldn't be the main job of him in this situation. But if we're talking about Talia's sort of security here, I'm very curious how you felt about her interactions with Garibaldi in this episode overall, because the two have kind of this weird thing going on where Garibaldi is omnipresent and always in the elevator and such. I have to say, I do like that we get this moment which feels much more mature than most of this kind of stuff that we see in 90s shows where these shenanigans are going on, and at some point Talia just turns on and tells you, you know what? Could you just not right now because I have a bad death threat over me, and maybe just cut this shit out for a second? And Garibaldi does that to his credit to some degree. So once again, just this awareness of the fact that what Garibaldi has been doing, how he's been following Talia around, is a little bit obnoxious, and she recognizes that and can stand up for herself when she needs to.
Yes, this is one thing which I really like about Talia, that she's clearly saying, okay, stop here. You do not cross this line. On the other hand, Garibaldi and his sort of obsession for Talia, I'm not sure how healthy it still is. But what makes it this exchange between the two so much better than like what Franklin did in the last episode, is that there is still, even though he is crossing a line and being pointed out on that, he is respectfully retreating. And then, he is not saying, okay, I leave it to you. You could debate, is this really going back and giving her space? But on the other hand, I think this is rather compassionate from him, how he reacts and is telling her stories and making her laugh. Because, yes, on one hand, a friend died, and usually you need time to be alone or to work things out. But I think the more important part in this moment is that there's a death threat hanging in the room. And I think the best way to handle this on the psychological level is to, take the person somewhere else with their mind than the problem at hand, because they themselves are in no way possible to solve it, usually.
I think this is on both ends, right? On one hand, it shows us just Garibaldi is good in this kind of situation just as a security chief. He has somebody that he needs to protect, and he needs to calm their nerves in some way, and he has his way of doing that, which is, just his way. It's very in his character that he would use humor for that, because we know that for him himself this works. This is why he is such a big fan of Daffy Duck, right? Presumingly. And on the relationship front, I just really like it, once again, especially in a 90s show, because it shows us Garibaldi doesn't function on this black and white, either I'm in a relationship with her or she is heir to me and doesn't matter at all. And it's like, okay, this is not the time for flirting, so I'm just going to be a good friend, and I'm going to try and make you laugh and going to help you through this. And there is no big animosity or talk about let's just be friends or something like that. No, it's just clearly the normal thing to do, and he just does it, which is, after what Franklin did last episode, just nice to see. It's good to see that the show can do this as well.
Yeah, and especially you see that Talia is happy with how he starts interacting with her. She is the one who asks, hey, do you want to stay maybe for tea? This is her way of saying, I don't want to be alone. But she is the one reaching out to him, and therefore it's on both sides accepted. So far more fitting, and it feels just better overall. Though I like to note that this humor approach of Garibaldi just happens to work with Talia, and that's not a general solution for this situation, that it just happens to be these kind of people that function together in the situation.
And I would like to believe that this is actually a case of Garibaldi knowing Talia well enough to understand that, because we have had a pretty good streak of Garibaldi episodes insofar that he has been very good at interacting with other people. When you think back to The Long Dark, there was a guy who was horribly traumatized by his deployment on a moon that was, taken down by the Soldier of Darkness. And Garibaldi didn't use humor in that situation. He was very serious in that situation to talk to this person. So we know that Garibaldi kind of has a knack for how to talk to people who are in distress. So I would give him credit for the fact that he probably knows enough about Talia at this point that he can kind of gauge how to approach this in a way that will be best on her nerves. Which still doesn't excuse the security team losing track of her later on. That's unfortunate, but luckily, okay, they managed to get through this. On the other side, we have Sheridan and Ivanova having a few conversations about this, and about what is happening, and Sheridan clearly bringing in his whole idea of collecting conspiracies. But there's a little bit more to that, right? And I noted down one quote here in his conversation with Ivanova, which I find interesting on multiple levels. It's, for one, an sort of a talk between how does he view telepaths in relation to humans, which is interesting that there is a very clear distinction where he has to specify, oh, well, I still consider them human, even though they're genetically different from us and such. But also it brings him to this ultimate conclusion of saying, I trust in individuals, not in people, which I find very indicative. So maybe we can talk about this exchange.
Not people, it was
institutions. I trust in individuals, not in institutions. Yeah, otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. Which, on the one hand is very fitting for somebody who would collect conspiracy theories, because those usually have this as a very strong element. But yeah, this is just a lot of insight into Sheridan that we're getting here, how he views the world.
And to me, it's quite understandable how he came up with this this idea. I mean, this whole telepath ability is something he, from the user point of view, will never experience, and therefore will never be truly able to understand how it is to have this kind of experience. So he's technically opening generally both doors, meaning the curse and the gift, one for everyone, and then saying, okay, these are the both doors that are usually open or could be open for a telepath. But based on that, I don't want to judge them. I just have this in the back of my mind, and then I try at least to look at the person themselves.
And I think this is interesting that he has this conversation with Talia, because not with Talia, with Ivanova, because from her we know that this is what she has mostly struggled with in interacting with Talia, right? That she has this intense dislike and distrust of Psycho for very good reason. And she has struggled with the fact that she wants to put her trust into individuals. With Mr. Grey, we saw that she was somewhat getting there, but clearly with Talia, it just took a lot of time to get to this point. And yeah, that the two kind of link together there, I find kind of interesting.
Yeah, especially since in this episode we have Talia here acting on the opposite, that since Psychops is the one kind of that raised her, that even though it's an institution where a lot of people she probably never met or even know, but it's like it stands in for her family, and therefore she is having trouble telling that I saw in this memory there was a woman in a Psychops uniform, and first I could imagine that later on she will tell if it comes up in some way, but I do understand why she's keeping it to herself, because this is like her home, her family, and she doesn't want to just from one idea want to put the blame on them.
And it kind of creates this problem, right? She knows that many people are not trusting telepaths at all. And now she's once again like putting telepaths as a whole, Psychor as a whole, at risk because of the actions of one Psychop that she sees in this vision, right? You can see how the logic there puts her in a very harsh position, especially because in this episode, once again, we are also reminded that racism of some capacity is a big thing in the Babylon 5 universe. I mean, Abel himself, even though he's clearly a victim in this plot, isn't a nice guy when he talks about, I was patched together by a snakehead doctor, because he clearly is dismissive of aliens, and then says, the sands must run red with Earther blood, and damn Earthers and such. So clearly these generalizations are a thing. So we do get examples in both directions. Turning back to Sheridan, I find it somewhat interesting that he holds this belief, trusting individuals over institutions, because on the one hand, I can totally follow that institutions have this capacity of being very problematic. At the same time, I would expect somebody in his position to oftentimes believe the opposite. When he has this interaction, for example, with the senator, clearly the senator doesn't have the best interests of anybody in mind. She's very clearly overstepping the boundaries of her authority. So how can Sheridan still hold his position as like commander of Babylon 5, working for this kind of person? I would assume the logic is because he trusts the institution of the Senate more than the actual senator sitting in there. So depending on how the power works out, for somebody in a big responsible position like Sheridan, I would usually associate that more with an idea that you trust into positions and into institutions a little bit more than the flawed people that inhabit them, especially in the context of a military. That's usually pretty important. So it's just an interesting quirk in his character, which I can see leading to some internal conflict. That is not saying that's like inconsistent writing or anything. People of all sorts are in these organizations. But I find it as an interesting potential tension that exists there, and maybe a reason why he was much more comfortable being commander of a ship rather than being commander of a station, where suddenly this becomes a much more immediate issue.
Yes, and when he's telling Ivanova about this new group of aliens that want to integrate themselves in Babylon 5, and he's telling how they meet them when he was still on the Agamemnon and everything. The problem there is, I mean, on one hand, he made contact with them. He spent some time with the people on this ship. They found, and there's, of course, you can meet a group of people and I met so many of them and they were so nice. But on the one hand, if you have like this contact, the people you meet can be nice, but you have to trust that these people are representative for in some way for the rest of their species in this case. It's kind of troublesome to distinguish, to say I trust individuals, but I don't trust institutions. But I think the important part is here, I trust individuals more than institutions. It's not an either or phrase, but yeah, this is my preference, which doesn't exclude the other side.
Absolutely, and I think this is also even more important if we are talking about first contact situations like you described, right? You have to be then able also to distinguish, if I have a person, an ambassador in front of me, how much do I view them as a representative of the institution and as an individual person? And we've talked about this to various degrees. How much do we see a private side to some of the ambassadors? How much do we see not a private side to these ambassadors? How clear is this distinction? Which I've noticed in this episode discussion especially, we are talking a lot about this episode in reference to previous episodes, which for me is a very good sign that there is enough of Babylon 5 already as a groundwork that we can now start making references, which is very fun. This is where discussions become a lot more involved. We are moving up on our third 20-minute mark, so I mean, we've talked about Sheridan's side, we've talked about Garibaldi's side, we talked about Abel's side. Is there any big angle on this plot that we want to illuminate, or are we getting ready for the tapestry?
I think we covered everything mostly so far. Maybe a short notice to the Bureau 13 and the woman shown in the last scenes. That obviously is the same one who was seen from Talia in the mind reading from the Lazarus Project. First of all, have I seen this person before? Because for some reason she looks familiar.
It's very possible that you have, but in Babylon 5 itself, I don't think so, no.
Good. Okay, then it's just this kind of situation. I think I kind of find interesting the idea of the name Bureau 13. I mean, 13 usually sign of unluck and bad things. But why is it Bureau? I mean, especially bureaucratic things are not considered to be something positive in any way. Mostly it's even effective in its way. I have to think of a lot of works from Kafka, which is usually the damning the bureaucratic system. And yeah, I was wondering when I heard this, okay, why to choose this name?
I think in general this points towards maybe the larger question of how does Bureau 13 fit into the bigger picture? Because the problem we are facing right now is that there are so many conspiracies for Sheridan to collect. We know that Earth Alliance itself has some problems because it has stuff like the Russia Act, which is problematic. And we know that it took the organic technology from infection and such. So they might be involved with this directly. We know Home Guard is an organization that exists. The Knights were part of an organization that exists. Psychor is kind of shady, and Ironheart told us that they have stuff going on. We know that there is extremist elements within the Earth Force military that exists there, that were sending people in cloaks and stuff around. There are so many elements, then people within Psychor might have their own thing, and now we hear about Bureau 13 as yet another covert rogue agency that is doing stuff, and it's just such a convoluted mess. We know that President Clark probably has his own little cabal that was responsible for the assassination. So are all of these the same thing, or are they connected in some way? And Bureau 13 is just one more eclectic name on top of that. And because we know this is what Sheridan heard as the name, who the hell knows how it fits in there? Personally, I'm always reminded of either the science fiction example of Section 31 from Star Trek, where it is named after, I believe, part of the charter, which is essentially like just the document after which this entire thing is founded. But the real life example would be, I believe, in North Korea, a part of the sort of criminal part of the economy that is operating outside of the country, which is named after literally the one office where all of it is administered, and that just takes off as this name. So it has very much this, like you say, bureaucratic, kind of eclectic, it doesn't really tell you anything about it, nature to it. And yeah, it's for me, it's just really this thing where I'm sitting here with a red yarn and trying to connect the dots, and there's just so many of them, and we don't know yet how any of them fit together. And maybe this just leads us quite smoothly into tapestry questions, because very clearly I would say in this episode we can make up a new color for a new thread in our episode roster, Bureau 13, and just Earth conspiracies in general. How do they fit together? How does it all connect? And I mean, I've already ranted about my frustration now. How about you? Do you have any big theories for Sheridan to collect on how all of this fits together? The assassination, the plans of Psychor, Bureau 13?
Yeah, I would be interested to see if and how the death of the late president would be integrated in this whole conspiracy theories, because I mean, we know it's not a conspiracy. We know that there was things going on that led to this. So I would be interested to see how something real would be turned in B5 there into a conspiracy theory.
Okay. That I think we can definitely keep as an open question to follow up on. Other than that, I mean, the big thing, we talked about it already, is Sheridan becoming more and more part of the station leadership and becoming more and more part of his thing. I can already say I will keep an eye on this tension between Sheridan's trust in individuals and institutions and how he is already kind of, I mean, in this episode, he feels much more sympathetic to the cause of Amanda Carter than his own government. And I wonder if this is something that will become a greater divide or not. How about you? Does it feel to you like Sheridan has found his place now as commander of Babylon 5, or do you feel like there are more places for him to go?
I'm certain there will be a lot of mess coming his way, and wrestling, maybe even crushing some parts, if not all, of his structure so far. But in this episode, I would say it goes rather smoothly, considering how he's acting and behaving, and that he has even some time to spare to a certain degree. Yeah.
Good on him, I would say. Good on him. Talia had maybe the most rattling and breaking down moment of this episode. And I'm just curious how you see her continuing her journey here. I have to say I'm always looking for the little tidbits, and I was very glad that even Ivanova, for all her hatred towards Psycho, was very concerned about Talia's well-being. It was just nice to see as a decent comment. But yeah, I do think there is some major internal conflict for Talia on the horizon now, because she now carries around her multiple secrets when it comes to Psycho, right? She has this like telekinetic ability that was gifted to her by Ironheart that she needs to keep a secret, and now she has some information about Psycho that she needs to keep a secret from everyone else on the station. So she's just accumulating things, juicy conspiracies for Sheridan to collect, and nobody can know about them. And that doesn't seem like something that can stay that way forever.
I think, of course, it will be important one way or another. I'm not sure. I don't want to lean into any direction of this, because the way it's portrayed there is everything is open. We have this person that is wearing a Psychops uniform, and of course we as the viewer of the series know, okay, she's still alive and obviously part of this thing that happened on B5, but for Talia's position, it is okay. There was someone in this uniform, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she was acting on psycho instructions or anything, especially since she found out at the very end that this person is considered to be deceased.
I think that's completely right. Like, it's easy for us to say, she should tell everybody because it's a psycho uniform and these are obviously bad guys. But then again, like, if that person was wearing an Earth Force uniform, would she tell anybody about that, right? Like, that doesn't give you any more information. We already know it's a rogue agency, so anybody who is in there isn't necessarily acting on behalf of the organization as a whole. So it's not really that much of a thing. So I
mean, the person that she saw doesn't necessarily at that point be a psycho member.
Absolutely. Like,
because, I mean, there's no proof. I mean, of course, at the end, when she sees that they found this person that is considered deceased, okay, then she realized, okay, it is someone from Psycho, but just from this information she had in the vision, there's not.
You mean the person involved with turning people into secret super agents might be lying about their identity? It's incredible. No, but it's completely right. And on top of that, this idea that, you know, this guy's memories have been tampered with so much, who is to say that this even is correct? So it puts in this position. And if I had to guess right now, I would assume more than anything, Talia's going to work with this idea that there are people who are doing bad things and they are utilizing Psycho and its uniforms and such for their purposes. They don't represent Psycho as a whole. And I think given the information that she has, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. All right. I think these are like three big throngs for our tapestry to continue on with. The very last bit that we're going to do today then is take a look at some of the comments that we received. And May, let's start with our first comment that is a new one that comes with a suggestion by Stein Wins. You guys should do live watch-alongs before talking about the episode, which is an idea that I know exists in various other podcasts. Basically, this idea of, you know, let's do some sort of live commentary on the episodes and such. And we already talked about this a little bit. And in short, the unfortunate answer is going to be probably not, at least not in the near future, for twofold reasons. One of the reasons is, and it's very much from my direction, for what we are trying to do here, experiencing the show partially for the first time and then talking about it as a whole, having a live watch-along where we maybe pause, talk about stuff, talk over each other and stuff would kind of ruin the experience. It would be either very boring to watch or very disruptive for us to do. On the other hand, there's also, and Meike, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit, the whole legal issue that is connected to that.
Yeah, the problem is that the laws in Germany are a lot different with using content from others and, of course, like series, like from official groups is quite strongly restricted. The most prominent case I know of is a German YouTuber that went on and said, hey, I take the first Harry Potter movie and cut it frame by frame and make a commentary on it, which is not a watch along, but she started this and she got a really tough problem. Warner Brothers, as far as I know, sued her on this. I mean, in the end, she was lucky to win this because the things she contributed to every frame was so much more than the movie itself, that it was considered to be in the citation rights. But this is a really, really tight rope we have there, and the chances of being sued when making a normal watch along, even if it's commented, are tough. And honestly, we neither have the nerves nor the money to test it out and end up being sued for doing this. Therefore, it's best for all to not do this, because in the worst case, this podcast would end.
The bright side on this is we still absolutely understand the appeal of a watch along, and we have plans for special related things where maybe we will have discussions that are closer tied to episodes and such. It's not going to be a watch along as such for reasons above, but we definitely will try out different formats to some degree to get closer to episode discussions, absolutely. We also have a comment on the characterization of Franklin, which of course was a big part of last week's episode, by Texas Under Shock, who wrote, "Once JMS takes over writing full time, his characterization becomes more consistent, more tolerable," talking about Franklin. At least in my opinion. There have been people who have never forgiven him for this episode, and so they attribute everything he does to him being a borderline sexual predator, which is simply not true. Which is interesting out of both cases. For one, maybe we can talk about our feelings about Franklin in general, because we have been very hard on him, but at least for my part, I would completely agree with Texas Under Shock here that Franklin has a lot of unfortunate actions here, and a lot of actions that are definitely very creepy, like getting people into his quarters and telling them, this was just shorter than getting you to the hospital, which is something like a sexual predator might do. But I still don't think that is what Franklin is. Franklin has boundary issues to no end, I would say, but I don't think he has malicious intent to that effect in any way.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I would describe him as arrogant, maybe in some parts egoistic, certainly with a god complex, and narrow-minded in a few cases or topics, but I wouldn't describe him, from what we've seen so far, as a negative person overall. It's just the accumulation of not so nice traits that make him so unlikable. Not because he's a bad person, but I hope you get all what I mean.
And for me, in part, this is what makes Franklin even more infuriating, because he is an idealist, and the ideals he believes in, I can largely very much agree with. It's just how he goes about it that puts it in the worst possible light. The other thing that Texas Under Shock already alludes to here is once JMS takes over writing full time, which is something that happens. You have, in the beginning here, the normal structure. You have somebody who writes the show overall and is credited with, creating the episode Bible and such. But there's also individual writers for every episode that make up the individual stories. That ends at some point in Babylon 5 when JMS writes everything just by himself, which is, by the way, a terrible idea in terms of workload that he undertakes in that time. But it does mean, of course, that then everything becomes much more tied to his vision. And for some characters like Franklin, this certainly means that if they were written with some flaws in mind, these flaws then become much more focused and much more consistent, and also dealing with these flaws becomes a lot more consistent. So this is definitely one of the things that we can look forward to, and which once again probably is going to give you, Meike, a little bit of whiplash, because the show feels differently, of course, if it's always the same writer, or if it's like right now, switching up every now and then. The last comment we have is from RA-3, who also wrote on the topic of Franklin and wrote, "This is just me, but if I woke up from cryosleep in a strange bed with someone I've never met sitting next to me and stroking my head, I would probably punch the person. That's the only appropriate response to such behavior." And I think we agree on that. This is probably the first thing that should have happened in that episode. That is completely understandable. He also goes on writing about one of his favorite scenes. For me, one of the best scenes in this episode is the final scene of Jakar being alone in his quarters studying the Book of Jaquan by candlelight, with the camera moving in on the image of the shadow monster in the episode. It sends chills down my spine, first time since I watched it, and still does. We also see the Centauri contempt for non-superstitions, which are in part cultural posturing, part London not wanting to confront the issue at hand. We alluded to this a little bit in the episode discussion already, right? Like how the Centauri portray themselves as these enlightened people. But I think it's nice that in this comment we get it sort of pushed together here. And I completely agree that the portrayal of Jakar, how this book is shown in candlelight, and how he is almost ritualistic, like looking for that ancient knowledge, is very effective and makes it a lot more approachable to me.
One point from Klaus' commentary is, I'm sad to see that The Long Dark wasn't so well received. Well, maybe since we spent so much time ranting about Franklin, this is the feeling you had. I'm really sorry that this was the case, because I think, Alex, you agree, and I'm sure Layla also agrees, that overall the episode was not a bad one or anything, even more of the opposite, especially with the acting of Murdoch, as I will always keep him calling. And yeah, that was what the episode got from the gutter, and made it actually a real good episode, even though Franklin horribly messed up.
I think for me it's also very much the case that what sticks with me about this episode are the good parts. I always look fondly back on the performance of Murdoch or Dwight Schultz, and everything that has to do with Franklin, we keep alluding to that, is then more connected to my view of Franklin as a character as a whole, and I don't connect it to this episode specifically anymore. The last thing of this comment that we should probably mention is that he took also the time to answer our lurker question about where and when people would like to time travel to, and he said, well, in part that sending him back in time would be a bad idea, because he would be one of those individuals who want to try and go back to fix everything, probably only making things a little bit worse. And I can relate to this issue. I think there are so many instances where it feels like, looking at history, if only somebody could nudge things just a tiny little bit, things would be so much better. So yeah, I would also be definitely guilty of going back in my time machine and like handing people in medieval times a toaster and saying, here you go, let's just get Industrial Revolution going a few hundred years too early.
Okay, so it's just me who would be the voyeurist sitting there eating my popcorn and just be antisocial and rant how horrible the people are. Yeah, I do understand. I'm the bad person here.
No, it's just everybody else has the Franklin problem. We are too idealistic and we don't have any boundaries about people in the past, so we just try to fix everything.
Yeah, maybe I'm the horrible opposite that then does nothing and just ranting. So I think that's not a good thing either. So.
And this puts a beautiful bow on our entire episode discussion, because now we're back at the beginning. Extremes in either direction aren't great. We need to find a good middle road. But all right, I think with this, we've managed our main discussion quite well. We, of course, have our lurker question for this week's episode, which is going to be, what do you collect? Do you have a collection of sorts? Probably something more tangible than conspiracy theories. Let us know. Until then, we will talk to you next week about the next episode. Title I do not have in my head. I will put it in later. But until next week, you can find us on all the social media platforms at the Third Age Podcast, here on YouTube, of course, and on Spotify, Amazon Music, and so forth. Anywhere you can find podcasts.
We hope you enjoyed the episode, even if it's just the two of us, and hopefully we see you with all three of us in the next episode.